The storm outside rattled the glass walls of Hartley Tower, but inside the elevator the real storm was unfolding. A single dad janitor and the city's most powerful CEO were trapped together, no way out, no escape from the secrets pressing in harder than the walls around them. The hum of the machinery died, leaving only silence and two pairs of uneven breaths. She had built empires. He scrubbed her floors. But that night, one wrong spark would tangle their lives forever, in ways no one saw coming. Follow my story to the end and comment the city you are watching from so I can see how far my story has gone. Samuel Cross never liked elevators. Not because they frightened him, but because they forced him still. He was a man used to moving, mopping, fixing, carrying, always in motion, always invisible. But on that bitter Thursday night, motion abandoned him. The elevator between the 20th and 21st floors shuddered, coughed, and froze, pitching him against the brass railing. Across the cabin, Evelyn Hartley, the CEO, whose name glittered on the glass outside the skyscraper, clutched her phone as if she could dial her way out of steel walls. She was composed, almost statuesque in her navy coat, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of something Samuel hadn't expected. Panic. He braced himself, knelt near the panel, and pried it open with the screwdriver he always carried in his back pocket. "It's dead," he muttered. His voice was gravel, the tone of someone who'd seen machines fail before. "Excuse me." Evelyn's voice cracked like ice, sharp and dismissive. "Don't touch it. Building security will handle this." Samuel gave a dry laugh. "Lady Security's drinking bad coffee 3 floors down. By the time they figure this out, we'll be breathing recycled air for hours. I'm just trying to make sure it's not fire in the wires." She narrowed her eyes. "You're a janitor, not an engineer." He met her gaze unflinching. "I used to be." The lights flickered, then steadied into a dim emergency glow. Shadows carved her face into marble, but Samuel saw the slight tremble in her hand as she lowered the phone. No signal, no rescue, not yet. He knelt again, steady, methodical. His calloused fingers traced the circuits. Evelyn watched, arms crossed, pretending indifference, though her breath came faster. "What exactly are you doing?" "Keeping us alive," he said, matter of fact, tightening a loose connection. A spark hissed, and she flinched backward. The cabin stilled. Evelyn pressed herself to the far wall. "This is absurd. We'll sue the maintenance contractors. This is unacceptable." Samuel wiped sweat from his temple with the sleeve of his coveralls. "Unacceptable is when the brakes give and we drop 20 floors. Right now we're lucky." Her chest rose sharply, betraying a fear she hadn't shown anyone in years. "Are you saying that it could get worse?" "Yeah." Silence fell thick and humming. Only the faint whine of wind outside cut through. Samuel leaned back against the opposite wall legs, outstretched hands steady. He'd learned long ago that panic was like gasoline spill, one drop and it spread. His job wasn't just fixing broken pipes or jammed doors. It was staying calm when the world tilted sideways. "You're too calm," Evelyn accused suddenly, her voice breaking. "Like you've been here before." He glanced at her eyes, heavy with something unspoken. "I've been in tighter spots." Her brows knit. "War." He didn't answer, only pulled the screwdriver from his pocket again, the tool catching the weak light. The elevator groaned, then jolting an inch, making Evelyn stumble. Without thinking, Samuel caught her arm. Her skin was cold beneath the cashmere sleeve, her pulse quick and frantic. Their eyes met just for a moment, hers sharp, and guarded his, steady and unyielding. "Easy," he said softly. "Breathe with me." She wanted to pull away to remind him of who she was, but her chest obeyed before her pride did. Inhale. Exhale. Slowly her breath matched his rhythm, steadier each cycle. For a flicker of a second, Evelyn Hartley, untouchable CEO, wasn't leading boardrooms or signing contracts worth millions. She was just a woman locked in a steel box, hanging on to the voice of a janitor who refused to let fear win. "You don't even know me," she whispered, almost to herself. Samuel let go of her arm, leaning back again. "Don't need to." The words unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. She stared at him, this man in faded coveralls with oil stains and weary eyes, and wondered why he looked more certain in the dark than she ever felt in the light. Minutes passed, the silence broken only by the hum of dead machinery and the beat of two hearts unwilling to confess their fear. Somewhere far above the storm-rattled windows, but here, trapped between floors, Two worlds collided in the quiet. Neither of them knew it yet, but the night would not end when the doors opened. It would only begin. The elevator finally shuddered awake with a violent clank, then lurched upward half a floor before the emergency brake slammed it still again. The jolt threw Evelyn forward, and Samuel's arm shot out instinctively, bracing her against his chest before she collided with the steel wall. She stiffened immediately, yanking herself free. "Don't touch me," she hissed, adjusting the lapel of her coat as though smoothing fabric could erase what just happened. Samuel said nothing. He simply leaned toward the panel again, listening to the faint clicks within the machinery. His silence wasn't submissive, it was practical. He knew her type: proud, polished, allergic to vulnerability. But he also knew fear when he heard it. "Looks like the override stuck," he muttered more to himself than her. "And what does that mean?" Evelyn snapped. "It means we're not getting out without help." "But—" He tapped the breaker with his screwdriver, then tilted his head toward the ceiling hatch. "If I can reach the emergency release, I might get us onto the landing." Her lips parted, incredulous. "You're not climbing through the ceiling like some action movie character. That's insane." Samuel shrugged, his voice calm, as if they were discussing the weather. "Crazy keeps us breathing." The cabin creaked ominously as though to punctuate his words. Evelyn clutched the brass rail knuckles white. For years she had ruled skyscrapers without flinching. But here in this suspended box her empire meant nothing. "Fine," she spat. "Do it. Just don't kill us in the process." Samuel dragged a crate from the corner, stood on it, and pushed at the hatch. Dust rained down as the panels scraped open. Cold air whistled through, sharp with oil and steel. He hoisted himself up, muscles straining, before glancing back down at her. "Give me your hand." Her brows shot up. "Absolutely not." "Suit yourself," he said, hauling himself into the shaft. But after a heartbeat of hesitation, she lifted her manicured hand. He gripped it firmly, pulling her up with surprising gentleness until she knelt beside him on the narrow ledge. The shaft yawned around them, dark, echoing, endless. Evelyn's pulse hammered in her throat. She hated being this close to danger, hated more that her life depended on someone she barely acknowledged in daylight. "Don't look down," Samuel said quietly. "Eyes on me." For a terrifying 5 minutes, they crawled across steel beams until they reached the maintenance ladder. Samuel went first, guiding her hands to each rung. She trembled, shoes slipping once, but his grip steadied her without hesitation. At last, he pushed open the landing door, ushering her into the dim hallway. Evelyn staggered onto solid ground, her heels clicking wildly against the tile. She inhaled deeply, chest heaving, the taste of freedom almost bitter. She turned to Samuel, ready perhaps to offer something like gratitude. But before she could speak, a voice barked from behind. "Cross." A tall, lean man in a company blazer strode down the hall. Mr. Vernon, head of building operations, eyes sharp as knives. He looked Samuel over with disdain, then flicked his gaze toward Evelyn. "What the hell were you doing in there?" "You know, protocol says wait for emergency crews." Samuel straightened, jaw tight. She was panicking. The brakes were slipping. "I did what I had to." Vernon sneered. "You're a janitor, not a hero. Next time you risk liability for this company, you'll be out on the street." Evelyn froze. She could feel Vernon's expectation that she'd not agree, dismiss this man like dust under her shoe. That was what CEOs did. That was the order of things. Her pride battled with something else. An image of Samuel's steady eyes in the dark, guiding her breath, catching her when she stumbled. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her throat dry. Samuel didn't wait for her. He simply lowered his gaze, muttered, "Yes, sir," and walked away. Evelyn watched his back retreat down the corridor, coveralls smudged with grease, posture heavy but unbroken. A strange pang tugged at her chest, something uncomfortably close to guilt. That night, Samuel returned to his tiny apartment on the south side. His daughter Lily ran into his arms, her hair smelling faintly of crayons and peanut butter. She tugged him to the table where a piece of paper waited. "Daddy, I drew this for you." The drawing showed a tall man holding the hand of a little girl, both smiling inside a box with ropes pulling upward. Above, she had written in shaky letters, "My dad is a hero." Samuel stared at it, throat tightening. He thought of Vernon's words. He thought of Evelyn's silence. He thought of how the world measured men like him not by courage, but by the dirt under their nails. He knelt, pulling Lily close. Thanks, sweetheart. That means more than you know. Lily grinned, her small arms wrapping around his neck. Samuel closed his eyes, clinging to the only truth that mattered here. At least he was seen. And though Evelyn Hartley hadn't thanked him, he knew she had felt it too. The unspoken proof that sometimes the ones no one notices are the ones who hold the world steady when it shakes. The morning sun glazed Hartley Tower in gold, but Evelyn Hartley felt none of its warmth. From her penthouse office, the city looked like a chessboard she controlled, yet her thoughts snagged on the night before the elevator. The dark, the janitor's voice steady against her panic. She had hated how much she'd needed him, hated more that she hadn't said thank you. Instead, she sat across from Dr. Mason, her therapist of 6 years. The room was soft, with muted lamps, shelves of books, and the faint smell of cedar. Evelyn's blazer hung open, her posture stiff as she tried to mask the tremor still caught in her chest. "You keep rubbing your wrist," Dr. Mason said gently, noting the way her fingers circled the spot where Samuel had steadied her. "Tell me why." Evelyn hesitated, then exhaled sharply. "Because I lost control. Because a janitor had to hold me up. Do you understand what that means for me?" Dr. Mason tilted her head. "It means you're human." "No." Evelyn snapped the word, slicing the air, then softer. "It means I was weak." The silence that followed pressed heavy. Evelyn finally whispered, "He reminded me of Mara." Dr. Mason leaned forward. Your daughter, Evelyn, closed her eyes. The way he spoke, the calm. It felt like for 1 second someone carried me. I haven't let anyone carry me since I lost her. Her voice cracked and she bit her lip hard enough to taste blood. And I hated him for it. I hated him because it felt safe. Dr. Mason said nothing, simply letting the confession hang in the air like fragile glass. Meanwhile, across town, Samuel folded the letter he had received from the courthouse the night before. His hands were steady, but his jaw was tight. Another delay. Another month of supervised visitation with Lily instead of the full custody he'd been fighting for. He slipped the letter into a drawer before Lily noticed. At 7 years old, she read everything, soaking up words like they were candy. She sat at the small kitchen table humming as she buttered toast with the seriousness of a surgeon. "Daddy, do you have to work tonight too?" she asked. "Yeah, kiddo," he said, forcing a smile. "But I'll be back before you know it." She frowned. "Can we still do the pancake game tomorrow?" "Always." The pancake game was theirs alone, flipping each one in the air until Lily giggled so hard she couldn't eat. It was Samuel's way of reminding her that laughter could survive even in the tightest corners of life. When he tucked her in that night, Lily reached under her pillow and pulled out the drawing she had made. "I'm keeping it here," she said proudly. "So every time I wake up, I remember, you're my hero." Samuel kissed her forehead, his throat thick. "Sleep tight, Peanut." Later, alone in the dim apartment, he let himself read the court's words again. Petitioner's request for full custody is denied at this time. Supervised visitation extended pending review. His shoulders sagged, but he didn't crumble. He had no room for collapse, not when Lily depended on him to stand. Back in the tower, Evelyn sat at her desk as the city lights flickered alive below. She stared at her reflection in the glass, flawless, cold, untouchable. Yet in the corners of her mind she heard Samuel's gravelly voice, "Breathe with me." It unsettled her because it wasn't pity she had felt in the dark. It was steadiness, safety, 2 things she hadn't trusted in years. And though she told herself she'd forget him, the truth was clear. The janitor's presence lingered like the faint smell of rain after a storm, impossible to ignore even when the sky had cleared. The work order slid from the printer in the basement ops room like a thin breath. Samuel reached for it with damp hands, the sting of cleaning chemicals still clinging to his knuckles. The sheet wore the company logo up top and a polite command beneath "Reinspect Floor 17 Fire Sensors," lighting array elevator interface. There was no signature, no initials. Just a red stamp note in the corner, "Restricted access." Restricted meant the floors that had been mothballed when budgets got tight, or tragedies made memory inconvenient. It meant areas where even rumor kept its voice down. Samuel frowned, reached for his keycard and felt that familiar tug in his chest, the quiet question that always came when a machine asked for a second chance. The service elevator hummed obediently to 16. Samuel hopped off, took the stairs for the last flight, and stood at a steel door with a badge reader that looked like it hadn't been blinked at in years. Dust filmed the glass slot. Someone had taped a strip of paper beside it long ago and written a single word in block letters, "Hold." The tape had yellowed, peeling at the edges. He swiped his badge. Nothing. He swiped again this time, angling the plastic like a pick. A beat. A reluctant chirp, the lock clacking with the tired grace of old hinges. Floor 17 inhaled when the door swung open. Not a draft, more like the sigh of a room remembering company. Drop cloths draped shapes into ghosts. A plastic fern had petrified in its pot, the green gone to brittle ash. Boxes labeled events and linen slouched against the wall as if ashamed of their posture. A charity poster from 2 winters back smiled toward an empty elevator lobby. A corner had curled up like a hand that wanted to wave. Samuel's boots left clean ovals on the dust. He set his toolbox down and listened. That was his first rule up here, or anywhere the lights forgot people's names. Listen before you touch things. Buildings talk if you don't bully them. This one creaked a little, but it wasn't the language of hazard. It was the slow, dignified stretch of a place that had stayed still too long. The elevator doors at the far end sat shut, the indicator dark. When he pressed his palm to the seam, the metal felt cool, as if whatever had happened here had left the air 1 degree colder. He knelt at a junction panel on the corridor wall, loosened the faceplate screws, and peered at the wiring with his flashlight. Whoever had mothballed the floor had done the bare minimum kill, the feed sticker the panel walk away. The emergency battery wore a date that made Samuel laugh under his breath. "You're a calendar with ambition," he told it, unhooking the leads. He set the dead unit beside his knee and pulled a new one from the padded sleeve in his box. Cross. The voice came from the stairwell. Samuel didn't startle. Voices never did what machinery could. He rose to see Mr. Lawrence, the building's doorman, emerging with the care of someone stepping into a church during off-hours, hat-in-hand coat, buttoned despite the stale warmth. Mr. Lawrence had a face lines trusted with eyes that made bad news behave. "You got the order?" Samuel asked. "It found me," the old man said, holding up his own slip edges softened by the journey through his vest pocket, like a hymn scribbled in the margins. Samuel angled his flashlight down the long corridor. "Who sent it?" "Hard to say, Mr. Lawrence replied. "Hardly matters. The floor's been asking to be seen." He took in the draped furniture, the slumped boxes, the shut elevator. "You ever notice how some rooms keep the weight of what they've witnessed?" Samuel had. "I hear it in the rails." Mr. Lawrence nodded. It meant more coming from a man who listened to doors for a living. He walked to the elevator and touched the seam the way you touch a friend's shoulder at a funeral. They shuttered this level after, well, he let the word trail away the way people did when they thought respect meant silence. Folks said it was prudence. Maybe it was. But sometimes we lock our memories in a closet and call that caution. "An accident?" Samuel asked, careful with the question. Mr. Lawrence's jaw worked, then gentled. "A winter. A day when the city looked like sugar and scraped like salt. A car faulted. The rest belongs to a family's grief. You fix things, Mr. Cross. You don't pry them open before they're ready." Samuel kept his eyes on the panel. He'd built a life on not asking for diagrams of other people's pain. Copy. They stood like that a moment, the quiet not uncomfortable. Samuel replaced the battery, tightened the leads, and flipped a small test switch. The green diode blinked to life brighter than the rest of the floor. He labeled the battery bracket with the date and a quick note in black marker. "Replace before it fails." "You always leave breadcrumbs," Mr. Lawrence said, amused. "Had a foreman once who said the future version of you is some poor stranger you shouldn't punish." Samuel replied. I listened. He moved to the fire sensor beneath the soffit. The sensor head wore the fur of months, maybe years. He popped it free, blew out a puff of ancient dust, and reseated it until the tiny LED winked ready. Further down, he unscrewed the metal cover from the elevator interface, the box where the control logic for the floor met the shaft. The relay inside had a scorched look, not failed, just tired. He sniffed. Warm dust and old ozone. The smell he associated with long-ignored apologies. Why'd they send me? He wondered aloud. This level was the kind of job the contracted techs took, the kind that came with clipboards and jargon, not a janitor's toolbox. Mr. Lawrence gave a little half shrug, the movement of a man whose life taught him to accept gifts without interrogating them. Maybe the right hands are the ones that show up. He stepped back toward the stairwell. I'll be on 16 if you need a witness. Samuel smiled at the old man's phrasing and returned to the interface. The board's logic was dated but decent. He had seen older brains do heavier lifting. He traced the low-voltage lines with a finger, found a brittle coupling, replaced it with a small splice, a neat twist tape, and shrink. He scribbled a quick label. Check here first. Not to be clever. To be kind. When he reattached the cover, the corridor found its own pulse. The fluorescents hummed to life in a line, one after another, like a confession made in stages. The air seemed to warm. He took a step back and tried an old, half-embarrassing habit. He talked to the elevator as if it were a horse spooked by thunder. All right, he said. Tell me what you need. Sometimes they did. Sometimes the call button wore a memory. He pressed it. The indicator stayed dark. He crouched, listened again. Far above the whisper of counterweights, below the patient thrum of machinery waiting to be invited, he popped the cover on the call button and found oxidation dulling the contacts. A little emery cloth, a little alcohol. The metal gleamed again, showed him its face. He pressed. The button gave a clean click, and a slim red ring lit, as if relieved to be understood. A moment later, the faintest breeze slipped from the door seam, the breath of a car moving toward them in a shaft. He imagined the cabin gliding down through the dark past floors, where people had not set foot in years past, stories stored on hangars. He imagined it listening the way he did for the difference between fear and readiness. While he waited, he walked the corridor. The charity poster that had smiled at nobody listed a winter gala. He'd mopped outside that ballroom once, catching a flash of Evelyn Hartley's dress in the revolving door, emerald silk trailing like a new sentence. Different night, different floor. He let the thought pass. He had no business putting her here in his head on this quiet landing. Still, the chill along his arms told him some rooms kept the shape of our losses even when we stopped tracing them. The elevator arrived. The doors stayed shut, but the seam carried sound, a soft chime, too clinical, the aftertaste of hospitals. Samuel winced. We can do better than that, he murmured, imagining a tone that fell home instead of keeping people on edge. He placed his palm against the metal again, and for no reason he could explain thought of Lily, how she counted when she was scared, how she drew boxes and filled them with light. You up to code, Mr. Cross? He turned. Mr. Lawrence had returned, hat-tipped, a smile hiding work. With him came another presence, quieter but denser, the kind that altered air pressure. Evelyn Hartley stepped through the stairwell doorway like a woman visiting a closed room in a museum she funded but never toured, coat-belted, chin-up eyes scanning as if to prove the place had nothing she hadn't already calculated. She stopped. The calculation faltered. Ms. Hartley, Samuel said, straightening without meaning to. He was suddenly aware of the smudge near his cuff, the scuffed toe of his boot. Her gaze landed on him. The flicker there and gone was surprise, of course. The janitor on a floor where janitors didn't roam. But then something else crossed her face, a ripple she controlled fast. She nodded to Mr. Lawrence. You two always find the rooms that nobody else hears. Rooms talk louder when they've been shut too long, the old man said soft. We came to listen. Evelyn faced the elevator doors but didn't go near them. Her hands remained tucked into the pockets of her coat, an engineer's hands with a CFO's restraint. Who sent the order? She asked, not looking at Samuel yet. Came from Ops, he said. Reinspect sensors lighting interface. No name. She accepted that with a small, humorless half-smile that said she knew things rarely signed themselves. Her eyes moved over the covered furniture, the charity poster, the stretch of dust broken by his boot prints. She stopped at the new battery, blinking in the panel at the neat Sharpied label, replace before it fails. Something in her posture lowered a fraction, as if the sentence nudged a rib she'd been holding tight for years. Why a 17? Samuel asked, gentler than any protocol required. He didn't mean why the order, he meant why the air felt like history. Evelyn's gaze slid to Mr. Lawrence. The doorman didn't speak. She studied the seam of the doors the same way a person studies a scar they tell themselves doesn't matter anymore. Then she lifted her chin. Because some rooms deserve to rest, and some don't. It wasn't an answer, it was a boundary. Samuel heard both. He wasn't a man who wrestled answers from other people's throats. He closed his toolbox and cleared the space in front of the elevator with easy, efficient motions. Interface relays on its last polite request, he said. I can nurse it, but it needs a replacement before we ask this car to behave like it believes us. Fire sensors are live. Lights will stop flickering if we stop insulting them with the ballast that belongs in a museum. For the first time since stepping onto the floor, Evelyn's eyes found his and held. They were calmer than he remembered from the night in the elevator, less marble, more river. You used to be an engineer, she said. Not a question. He shrugged. Now I keep the place from tripping people who assume the ground is steady. A beat passed between them, balanced and fragile as a glass set on the edge of a table. Mr. Lawrence, wise enough to leave the right people alone with the right silence, tipped his hat again. I'll be back with a sign to keep the curious from hurting themselves, he said, and retreated to the stairwell. Evelyn stepped closer to the panel he'd opened, scanning the tidy work. A small line drew between her brows, the kind that came from remembering she once sketched rooms before she learned to price them. How long to make this kinder, she asked. Samuel didn't hide the way the word settled him. A day to fix what's obvious. Longer to fix the way it feels. The way it feels, she repeated more to the floor than to him. Her eyes flicked again to the seam of the doors. She didn't move, but the room did, tilting back toward light, by a degree you'd miss if you hadn't spent your life noticing small angles. Start, she said at last. Start small, start right. He nodded. Yes, ma'am. He knelt again back to work near to prayer, then it looked while she stood a few paces away. Hands in her pockets, shoulders squared against the past like a woman who had finally decided to visit it without letting it evict her. Outside wind rattled the vents. Inside the new battery's green diode kept watch. The relay clicked as if testing its knees. Samuel labeled another wire, tightening the tiny screw with the same care he'd used to buckle Lily into a seatbelt. He didn't look at Evelyn again. He didn't have to. He could feel a shift, faint as static in the air between them. The floor had started to breathe. By the time he packed the last wrench, the overheads no longer buzzed like flies. The corridor had a hum like a refrigerator in a kitchen that knows its people will come home. As he rose, the elevator chimed again, in that sterile note he hated, a sound that made the skin brace. He grimaced, half smiling. We'll fix that, he said, almost to himself. We'll make it sound like a promise, not a warning. Evelyn heard him. A promise she repeated softly, like someone tasting a word they'd given up on. He slung the toolbox, and their eyes met one more time. She didn't thank him. He didn't need her to. But as he turned toward the stairwell, she spoke, not quite stopping him, not quite letting him go. Mr. Cross, she said, if you write me an honest assessment of this floor, mechanical and emotional, I'll read it, personally. Samuel's mouth tilted. Then I'll write it. Honestly. He stepped through the door. As it closed, Evelyn stayed with the seam of the elevator, the once clinical chime still hanging in the air like breath you haven't yet let go. Her reflection hovered faintly in the brushed steel, a woman who had built walls around grief and now stood on a landing she once ordered shut. The floor didn't accuse her. It only waited. Down in the stairwell, Samuel checked his watch and thought of a 7-year-old who would ask tonight if pancakes could be for dinner. We'll fix the chime, he told himself, not because music mattered, but because the body listened. If you taught a machine to greet people kindly, maybe the people inside remembered how to greet each other the same way. He took the last steps, 2 at a time, already composing sentences in his head for the report he'd promised. The words weren't fancy. They didn't need to be. Replace relay, rewire interface, reseat sensors, label for future hands, and this warm the light soften, the echo give the elevator a tone that ends at home. Behind him on floor 17, a long, quiet corridor settled into a new posture, not healed, not yet, but awake. The rain had moved in by morning, drumming the glass walls of the tower until the skyline blurred into a gray watercolor. Samuel stood with his mop in the lobby, sleeves rolled up, pushing water spots off the marble tiles where umbrellas had failed their owners. The world outside looked washed of its edges, but inside the building life moved with the rigid clarity of schedules. Phones pressed to ears, leather shoes, clicking the echo of names whispered across reception. He tried not to think about floor 17, though it lingered like a faint perfume in the corners of his mind. The blinking green diode, Evelyn's gaze at the elevator seemed the way the word promise had sat on her tongue. Samuel had written his report the night before at his kitchen table, while Lily colored beside him. She'd asked why he was frowning at his notebook instead of smiling at her rainbow horse. He had smiled then and told her sometimes buildings needed a bedtime story too. The letter was folded in his breast pocket now, waiting for the chance to hand it over. But CEOs didn't exactly wait in line at the janitor's station. "Morning, Sam." It was Carlos from security dropping a paper cup of coffee on the counter with a grin. "Storm's got folks cranky, half of them yelling at me like I ordered the weather myself." Samuel chuckled, slid the mop aside, and sipped. "Burnt thin but hot, the kind of gift you thanked anyway." "They ever thank you when the sun's out?" Carlos barked a laugh. "Brother, they don't even see me when the sun's out." Before Samuel could answer, the elevator bell chimed the usual polite note, not the sterile one that haunted floor 17. The doors opened on Evelyn Hartley. She looked different in daylight. No emerald silk, no ballroom glow, just a storm-colored trench coat, heels damp from the street hair pulled back into a braid that seemed too personal for corporate hours. Still, people parted around her as though the rain itself obeyed her stride. Ms. Hartley, Carlos murmured, straightening. Samuel gave the smallest nod, but her eyes landed on him anyway. "Mr. Cross," she said evenly, as if testing how his name felt in public air. "Do you have it?" Samuel's hand moved to his pocket. "Yes, ma'am." "Walk with me," she instructed. No hesitation, no glance to see if he'd comply. The rhythm of someone used to being followed. He shot Carlos a look. The guard grinned and waggled his brows. "Good luck, brother." Samuel caught up with her across the lobby, adjusting his stride to match the sharp cadence of her heels. She led him into an empty conference room, all glass walls and polished wood. Rain streaked the windows in trembling lines. "May I?" he asked, holding out the folded report. She took it, set it flat on the table, and smoothed it open with one hand. Her eyes scanned quickly the way people who live in contracts do. She didn't flinch at the technical notes. Replace relay, rewire interface, reseat sensors. But when she reached the last line, her posture shifted almost imperceptibly. Warm the lights, soften the echo. Give the elevator a tone that ends at home. Her eyes flicked up. "You wrote this." "Yes, this last part. This isn't protocol." "No, ma'am. But it's truth." She considered him, then tapped the paper with her finger. "Do you know why I closed that floor?" He shook his head. "I can guess. But guessing doesn't make it mine to know." For the first time, her composure cracked into something human. "My brother died there. Elevator fault. Mechanical, they said. I saw it as betrayal. I shut the floor, swore it would never hold another meeting, another party, another careless hour." She looked back at the paper. "Your words. They feel like reopening a wound." Samuel swallowed, or starting to clean it. Silence filled the glass box of a room heavy with the sound of rain. Evelyn folded the paper again carefully, as though the creases mattered. She slipped it into her coat pocket. "You'll fix it." Quietly. "No contractors, no committees, just you." Samuel blinked. Ma'am, that's not my job." "It is now," she replied. The door opened suddenly. A young man in a navy suit leaned in, irritation pinched across his face until he noticed Evelyn. "Oh, Ms. Hartley. Sorry, I didn't realize." Her look froze him. "You didn't. Close the door." He obeyed. Samuel let out a breath. "You want me working that floor? I'll need access. Parts, time. You'll have it." Her voice left no room for negotiation, then softer, like an afterthought. "Thank you, Mr. Cross." He didn't expect gratitude, and hearing it from her lips startled him more than the storm outside. He nodded, unsure how to hold it, and she left the room with her trench coat swaying like a banner. Samuel stood alone in the echo. He touched the table edge, grounding himself, then glanced at the rain-washed skyline. Whatever had begun in that broken elevator was only pulling him deeper now. He had stepped into a story larger than a janitor's mop and toolbox, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he felt it tightening around him like fate. The next evening, Samuel found himself standing outside the locked doors of floor 17, a brass key in his palm that hadn't been there yesterday. Evelyn's instructions had come through the head of maintenance, short, clinical, without her name attached. But Samuel knew whose hand had moved behind the curtain. He slipped the key into the lock. The heavy door groaned as it swung open. The air inside hit him first stale cold metallic. The space was intact but abandoned like a ballroom left mid-step after the music cut out. White sheets covered long tables. Chandeliers gathered dust, their crystal teardrops dulled. The silence was thick enough to feel on his skin. Samuel moved through with steady steps, flashlight beam brushing over corners where time had collected. He crouched near the elevator shaft, studying the panels. His hands traced the seams, fingers learning the machine's language. He worked for hours, tightening relays, checking the brake system, running diagnostic cables from the handheld device he borrowed from an old friend in engineering. Each time the gears hummed, he thought of Evelyn's brother, though he didn't know his name. The thought pressed at him like a presence. At midnight, he sat back wiping sweat with the rag in his pocket. His reflection stared at him from the metal door. Tired eyes, oil-streaked skin, a man no one in the tower noticed until something broke. A sound stirred behind him. He turned sharply. Evelyn stood in the shadows near the balcony, a slim figure wrapped in a black coat. Her presence startled him more than the silence breaking. "You shouldn't be here this late," he said. "I could say the same." Her gaze swept the room, landing on the elevator. "It smells the same," she murmured, almost to herself. "Like iron. Like when they carried him out." Samuel set his tools down, rising slowly. "I'm sorry." The words sounded inadequate, yet he meant them. She drew closer. Heels silent on the dust-soft carpet. "Do you believe machines can remember? That walls hold echoes?" "I think people do," Samuel replied. "Machines just give them a place to land." Evelyn's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. She stopped at the covered table, running her hand across the sheet. A gray streak appeared where her fingers brushed. "I didn't expect you to write what you did. About softening the lights, changing the echo. You needed more than bolts and wires fixed." She looked up at him, then her eyes sharp but wet at the edges. "You're a janitor. How do you know what I need?" Samuel held her gaze. "Because fear looks the same on anyone. And healing, it starts the same too." For a moment she didn't speak. Then she turned toward the elevator doors, her reflection staring back at her. "When I was in there with you," she whispered, "I wanted to scream. I've never wanted to scream in my life. And you," she paused, voice catching, "you told me to breathe." Samuel felt the weight of the night press between them, heavy and fragile at once. He reached for his toolbox, breaking the moment. "I'll get this working. Safely. But you might need to decide whether you want it open again." Her chin lifted, the CEO mask sliding back into place. "I do. But it's not for me." He studied her face, but she didn't elaborate. Instead, she turned toward the balcony doors, pushing them open. A cold rush of rain-scented air filled the room. She stood there, silhouetted against the city lights. "You have a daughter," she said suddenly. Samuel stiffened. "How do you know that I asked?" He stepped forward, protective instinct sharpening his voice. "With respect, Miss Hartley." "That's personal." Evelyn didn't flinch. "Everything is personal. That's why people break." She turned to face him, wind-tugging strands of hair loose from her braid. "Does she know you're doing this? Working nights climbing through broken shafts?" Samuel's shoulders eased, his tone softening. "She knows I fix what's broken. That's enough." For the first time, Evelyn's expression wavered, the iron edges softening. "Maybe that's what I need too." Neither spoke again for a long while. Samuel returned to his tools, the click of metal and hum of circuits filling the silence. Evelyn lingered at the balcony, arms crossed, watching the storm roll over the city. When she finally left, she didn't say goodbye. But she left the door unlocked. Samuel knew what that meant. Trust, however fragile, had begun to thread between them. And with it came danger, because threads that thin could snap at any second. The text came at 10:41 p.m., when rain had thinned to a mist and the city felt like it was keeping secrets. Corner Cafe on Wabash. They still use ceramic. Samuel read it twice, a little thrown by the formality of initials in a message, then pulled on his jacket and told the night doorman he'd be back before the lobby plants got thirsty. The cafe's windows were fogged, the doorbell a tired little cheer. Inside, a radio hummed an old love song that meant something to someone once. Two teenagers in damp hoodies split a milkshake at the back. A guy in a mechanic's jacket read a dog-eared paperback near the radiator. It smelled like coffee that forgave you and pie that didn't brag. Evelyn had taken a booth by the window. No entourage, no driver. No hard edges except the ones she carried in her shoulders. She was still in that black coat hair caught at the nape, a few strands defying the order she wore like armor. A pair of ceramic mugs steamed between them, unadorned. No logos, no gloss, like they'd been here before the high-rises learned how to introduce themselves. "You came," she said, as if she hadn't doubted it, and doubted it anyway. "You texted," he said, sliding into the booth. "I try not to ignore emergencies. This isn't an emergency." "Then it's important," he said, and left it at that. For a moment, neither touched the coffee. Outside, a bus hissed past a wet ribbon of sound. Evelyn stared at her hands like she was deciding whether to put something fragile into them. When she finally spoke, her voice had none of the tempered glass from the boardroom. It was human and a little out of practice. 5 winters ago, she said, I stopped letting anyone help me. I told myself I was becoming efficient. She glanced up, checking his face for judgment and finding none. There was a blizzard. Everything closed. My husband was out of town negotiating a deal I can't even remember. I was 34 weeks. Samuel didn't move. The weight of the words set itself on the table between the mugs. The radio trailed into a commercial and then changed its mind. "We waited too long to leave," she went on. "The hospital was 20 minutes away in any sane universe. That night it was an hour, and we didn't have an hour." She swallowed her throat, working like it had practiced refusing this story. Her name was Mara. I named her before they told me not to. I still said it. I say it now so the world remembers she brought a name into it. Samuel's hand tightened around his mug until the heat finally registered. "I'm sorry," he said, quiet words worn smooth by use and meant anyway. No one should have to hold a storm and a clock at the same time. Evelyn huffed a sound that wanted to be a laugh and didn't make it. "Do you know what I did after I did what I'm good at? I built a spreadsheet out of air. If I could control inputs, maybe grief would obey a formula. I made rules for breathing. I made rules for sleeping. If a feeling arrived without an appointment, I fired it." She took a careful sip of coffee, like she needed to prove to herself her hands could still lift and lower. "And then, last night in that elevator, I couldn't fire fear. I tried. It stayed. That annoyed me." The corner of her mouth twitched. "You annoyed me, because you made it smaller." "I don't know how to make anything smaller," Samuel said. "I just try to give it a corner to sit in while we do the next thing." "The next thing," she repeated, tasting the simplicity. She sat back, studying him as if there were footnotes on his face. "Why were you so calm?" Samuel looked past her at the window where droplets crawled down like someone trying to read a sentence upside down. "I used to fix machines for a living. The ones that pretended they were unforgivable. They weren't. They just needed someone to name their parts. Then I had Lily, and the court decided the best way to measure love was paperwork and predictability. Turns out the way to stay calm is to choose one thing at a time, even when 10 are shouting. You have her how often, Evelyn asked, not as a CEO sizing a liability, but as a woman measuring what a man has to carry. Right now, supervised visits. He said the words flat like steel. They say they're protecting kids from chaos. I say I'm the man who shows up with lunch in a bag and a plan for homework. Judge says, come back with more proof. Your life doesn't tilt when a paycheck does. He shrugged. So I work the tower and a second shift when I can. I shave sleep instead of corners. She was quiet long enough for the waitress to arrive with 2 plates without being asked, 1 apple pie, 1 cherry. The waitress, a woman with inked roses on her forearm, and the expression of a person who has decided kindness is a policy set down forks, and murmured, "You both look like you could use true sugar," then retreated before either of them could pretend they weren't staying. Evelyn let the steam from the cherry pie fog her lenses for a heartbeat, and then took them off, folded them onto the vinyl like a truce. "You make it sound simple," she said. "Show up, fix what you can, breathe. But it isn't simple. It's not, he agreed. It's arithmetic. It's also love, which is just arithmetic with skin on it. She blinked, then gave a tiny, unwilling laugh. That's not in any quarterly report I've ever read. Quarterlies are scared of verbs. They ate in a small, companionable silence, the kind that is rare enough to feel like weather. Every now and then the doorbell rang and a gust of night gossip slipped in, then shut. A woman in a Cubs cap asked for extra napkins. A delivery guy counted tips near the register, lips moving. Somewhere a dishwasher sang under his breath something Spanish and steady. Evelyn set her fork down. When I closed floor 17, I told myself it was policy. I used that word the way a child uses a blanket. But policy didn't bring him back. It just kept me from hearing the building breathe. Her eyes lifted. Last night, when you said the chime should end like home, I heard the first piece of an apology I might actually be able to say. Samuel studied the coffee stain ring on the napkin between them. The body keeps score. So do rooms. If we change the score, people stop bracing. And you, she asked, a softness in the question he hadn't heard from her before. Do you ever stop bracing when Lily falls asleep before the end of a story, he said. When she laughs so hard at a pancake in the air, she forgets it's supposed to land. When she calls me from her mom's house just to tell me the moon looks like a nickel. Evelyn looked away sharply. He pretended not to see her eyes shine. She rolled the word nickel between her teeth like she might adopt it later privately. Mara would have been 4, she said. She would have hated cherry pie. She would have asked for ice cream on the apple and then refused to eat it when it melted, and I would have pretended to be stern and then ordered another scoop. There's still time to be that kind of stern, he said. It just might be for someone else. Or for a room. A room, she echoed, and floor 17 walked into the booth and sat down with them. She traced a small circle into the moisture on the window, an absent-minded habit that looked like someone drawing a door. The waitress drifted back with refills. I like this table, she said lightly. It looks like y'all are telling each other the true things. Trying, Samuel said. Good, she nodded. Truth leaves better tips. She winked and moved on. Evelyn watched her go. Do you know the most infuriating part, she said. I've spent years wanting to be the kind of person whose feelings don't get a vote. Tonight, I find myself wanting to be believed when I do have one. Then say the small one that fits this room, he said. Leave the big ones for the rooms that promise to hold them. She held his gaze. I'm tired. That's a real feeling. I'm also angry, she added the words, tasting like admission. Not at you, at myself, at a city that shuts doors and calls it safety, at a company that can write a condolence letter and forget how to listen. Anger's just energy looking for a wrench, Samuel said. Give it a job. What job would you give mine, she asked. He thought of the sign Lily had once made for their apartment door. Block letters, proud and uneven. Welcome isn't heavy to carry. Start with one room that behaves the way people deserve, he said. Prove it. Then watch language change. Language, she murmured, thinking like the architect she had been before she became a spreadsheet. We changed no access to deferred renovation to make ourselves feel noble. Maybe it's time to be plain. Bridge the suits and shoes, that's a good sentence. He smiled. Feels like it knows where to stand. She wiped a thumb at the corner of her eye, surprised to find a tear had dared. She looked at it on her skin like it was a note from a stranger, then flicked it away gentle. You annoy me less, she said. Progress? He deadpanned. Don't get used to it. They smiled the small, crooked kind that people wear when their faces are learning a new muscle. The rain eased. The window cleared enough to show a slice of Wabash glimmering like a coin no one had thought to pick up. Tell me something true you haven't said out loud, she challenged, leaning back, testing the booth for comfort and finding some. Samuel's eyes went to his hand scar on the knuckle from a warehouse pallet. A burn near the wrist from a distracted kettle. I'm scared the judge will decide to make me reliable by making me invisible, he said. That the best version of me they'll accept is the one who never needs help from anyone with a nicer chair. Evelyn breathed in like someone about to dive, and then chose a different kind of courage. I'm scared I'll keep using promotions as medication, she said, and find out I cured the symptom and kept the disease. The radio found another old song. The teenagers in the corner argued about whether to split a second milkshake. The guy in the mechanic's jacket stood left, $1.02 beneath his cup, and tipped his head at Samuel, the way men sometimes do when they recognize the shape of each other's days. "Do you ever pray?" Evelyn asked, not to accuse, but as if the question had walked to her on its own. "I work," he said. "Some people call that praying with your hands." "Does it answer?" "Sometimes a door opens," he said. "Sometimes it stays closed and I learn a different route." She nodded, trying that on for size. "If I asked you to walk a different route with me, hypothetically, would you believe me?" "Depends," he said, "on whether the route has room for a kid who thinks pancakes can be currency." A laugh broke free of her, unguarded, almost startled. Heads turned from the counter. She let the sound happen, then shook her head as if embarrassed by music she hadn't ordered. "I haven't laughed in a cafe in a very long time," she said, voice steadying. "It feels rash. Feels alive." They finished the pie, coffee cooled to honesty. When they stood, the waitress slid the check down with a look at Evelyn that saw a woman and not a title. Samuel reached for his wallet. Evelyn stopped him with a palm. "Let me," she said. "You gave me something that doesn't take cash." "Pie still costs money," he pointed out. "So bill me for the pie," she said. "Keep the other debt on paper I don't need a copy of." Outside, the air had that clean post-rain taste that makes a city believe in its own resilience. They stood under the cafe awning as a cab splashed by then, another headlights cutting slices through the damp. "I don't know what happens next," Evelyn admitted. "I'm not promising grand gestures. I'm just promising not to look away." "That's the only promise I trust," Samuel said, and meant it. She hesitated, then held out her hand. Not the boardroom shake, a different offer, the simple human kind. He took it. Her fingers were cool, his were warm. The contact said neither owed the other, and both carried something worth sharing. "Good night, Mr. Cross." "Good night, Ms. Hartley." They stepped in opposite directions, then stopped and glanced back at the same time, surprised to find the other doing it the way strangers sometimes check a map and realize they're part of the same route after all. By the time Samuel reached the tower, the lobby's plants were still not thirsty. Mr. Lawrence lifted a hand in a question, and Samuel answered with a nod that said the world had not gotten easier, only more honest. Upstairs, Evelyn paused outside the penthouse elevator as the sterile corporate chime sounded its small apology. She closed her eyes and imagined another tone, 2 notes falling home. For the first time in 5 winters, the imaginary sound did not make her flinch. Morning cracked over Chicago like a slow-burning fuse. The streets shimmered from the night's rain, a damp silver sheen on the asphalt. Commuters moved in practice patterns, umbrellas, folded briefcases, swinging earbuds plugged in. Inside Hartley Tower, the lobby hummed with its usual order heels on marble, the muted buzz of phones, the clipped chatter of assistants rushing to keep up with executives. Samuel had already been working for 2 hours, his mop gliding across the lobby's edges, catching the corners no one noticed. He worked with that quiet precision of someone who understood that dignity lived in details. He wasn't expecting to see her. He wasn't expecting her heels to click toward him or her gaze to cut through the morning noise and land squarely on him. But Evelyn Hartley didn't look away. "Mr. Cross," she said, voice low enough that only he could hear, though the words startled him like a spotlight. "Ms. Hartley," he replied, straightening. He braced for some polite nod, a CEO's courtesy, before she vanished into the upper floors. Instead, she stood still, scanning the polished marble beneath them, as if measuring the weight of something invisible. "I need to ask you something," she said finally, "not in a boardroom, not over contracts, just as 2 people in the same building." He held the mop upright like a staff, grounding himself. "Ask." Her mouth parted, but hesitation caught her. A flicker of unease passed over her face, quickly disguised. She glanced at the executives brushing past them, their eyes politely averted, but their curiosity obvious in how they slowed just enough to register the scene. Evelyn's jaw tightened. "Not here," she whispered. "Walk with me." It was a strange request, maybe even reckless, but Samuel saw no calculation in her eyes, only an urgency she hadn't let anyone else glimpse. He leaned his mop against the supply cart, peeled off his gloves, and followed her through the lobby's glass doors into the crisp air of Wabash Avenue. The city was awake now, horns blaring, a vendor selling hot pretzels, a cyclist weaving through traffic with a defiance that would outlast the light. Evelyn didn't head for her black car idling at the curb. Instead, she walked toward the river, each step quick, like she was outrunning her own second thoughts. They stopped on a pedestrian bridge. Below, the river carried last night's rain in a restless current, the water a bruised green reflecting towers that tried too hard to touch the sky. Evelyn rested her hands on the railing, fingers tightening until her knuckles paled. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," she began, eyes fixed on the water. "About giving anger a job. About making one room behave the way people deserve." Samuel waited, sensing this wasn't the moment for interruptions. Her voice dipped lower. "That room is floor 17. The words hung between them, sharp and weighted. Samuel frowned, his mind instantly flashing back to the dark, sealed corridor, the one people whispered about, the one that's been closed for years. She nodded. "The board calls it deferred renovation. But the truth is, it was grief management. My grief management. Mara should have been born the week we were scheduled to finish construction. I couldn't step onto that floor without losing air." She swallowed hard, jaw trembling, before she forced it still. "So I shut it down. Policy, I told everyone. But it was personal. I locked grief in concrete and steel, and I let it rot there." Samuel studied her profile. This wasn't the CEO who dismissed problems with polished words. This was a woman standing on a bridge admitting her empire had cracks she couldn't plaster. "You want to reopen it," he said. "I need to," she whispered, "but I can't do it alone." Her eyes finally turned to him, raw and unguarded. "That's why I'm asking you." "Me?" His brow furrowed. "You've got architects, contractors, security teams. Why me?" "Because you're the only one who told me the building still breathes," she said. "The only one who wasn't afraid to say the word home in a place made of steel. You see what's alive in these walls, not just what's broken." She hesitated. "And maybe you're the only one I'd believe." Her confession landed heavy, not because it flattered him, but because it asked for something he hadn't expected to be asked again: trust. He leaned on the railing, watching the water churn below. "If we open that floor, it won't just be paint and wiring," he warned. "It'll be ghosts. Yours. Maybe mine, too." "Then don't let me turn away," she said, voice barely audible. "If I falter, make me face it. I need someone who won't let policy win this time." Silence stretched, broken only by a seagull's cry and the distant horn of a river barge. Samuel thought of Lily, her laughter, her stubborn faith that pancakes could buy anything worth buying. He thought of the judge who wanted proof he could provide stability. Maybe this was proof, not wealth, not power, but standing his ground in a place most people avoided. "All right," he said finally. "But if we do this, we do it right. No token ceremony, no ribbon cutting for the cameras. We open it to light, to air, to people. Or we don't open it at all." Evelyn exhaled like someone who'd been holding her breath for 5 winters. Agreed. She looked back at the river, her shoulders less rigid now. "Then we start tomorrow." Tomorrow. The word felt both too soon and not soon enough. As they walked back toward the tower, Samuel noticed a man across the street watching them too closely. He wore a tailored coat that didn't match the frayed leather satchel slung over his shoulder. He wasn't holding a phone, but his gaze tracked Evelyn with the precision of someone who had memorized her movements. Samuel's gut tightened. Old instincts from his warehouse days, knowing when a stranger's eyes meant more than curiosity, flared to life. When Evelyn's driver opened the car door, Samuel leaned closer. "You know that man?" he asked quietly. She followed his gaze. The stranger turned smoothly, vanishing into the crowd with calculated ease. Evelyn's brow furrowed. "No." "Why?" "Because he knew you," Samuel said flatly. "And he didn't look like he came here for a pretzel." Evelyn's eyes darkened, tension returning to her shoulders. But she forced calm. "We'll deal with that later," she said. "For now, thank you." She stepped into the car, but before the door closed, she added softly, "Don't disappear, Mr. Cross." As the car pulled away, Samuel stood at the curb, staring after the vehicle, the weight of her words pressing against the early morning air. Don't disappear. He wasn't sure if it was a request, a warning, or a promise. Behind him, the revolving doors of Hartley Tower spun, swallowing executives and interns alike. Tomorrow, floor 17 would open, and with it more than one secret. The next day arrived with a sky that couldn't make up its mind. Low clouds rolled in from the lake, muting the morning sun to a dull pewter glow. The city felt suspended as if waiting for something to break. Inside Hartley Tower, Samuel carried his battered toolbox into the freight elevator, rising toward the sealed level he had agreed to confront with Evelyn. His palms were roughened by years of work, but he still rubbed them together as the numbers ticked upward. He had fixed machinery in boiler rooms, repaired wiring in storm-battered schools, even balanced on ladders swaying under ceiling fans. Yet this felt heavier, like he was walking into someone's unspoken memory. The doors groaned open onto floor 17. It looked just as it had the night before. Dust sheets draped over furniture chandeliers unlit the air stale, as though it hadn't been exhaled in years. But this time he wasn't alone. Evelyn Hartley stood by the window, her black coat draped over a chair, her blouse sleeves rolled back. For once she looked less like a CEO and more like a woman preparing to lift something she had no business lifting. "You came," she said softly. Samuel set down his toolbox with a dull thud. "Didn't think I had a choice after last night." She gave a tight smile. "Good." Then she turned her eyes, tracing the dark elevator doors at the end of the corridor. That's where it happened. Not the fall, just the start. The inspection team ignored a warning. "My brother, he stepped in when the rest of us didn't. He paid for it." Her voice was even, but her hands gripped her elbows as though holding herself upright. Samuel walked the length of the hall, his boots crunching faintly on grit. He stopped in front of the doors. "You ready for me to start?" "No," she whispered. Then, firmer. "Yes." He pried open the access panel flashlight, cutting across old wiring. Sparks flared faintly when his pliers tested the current. The building groaned around them, settling, sighing like a body shifting in uneasy sleep. While Samuel worked, Evelyn paced. Her heels clicked and stopped, clicked and stopped. She hovered near the balcony, then returned to the elevator as if the floor itself pushed her in restless circles. Finally, she broke the silence. "I used to think grief was private, that if I kept it hidden long enough, it would wither. But it didn't. It grew roots spread into the walls. Sometimes I hear it at night humming in the pipes." Samuel didn't look up from the wiring. "It doesn't go away by hiding it. You gotta give it air, otherwise it rots." Her gaze lingered on him. "Is that what you did?" The question cut deeper than she knew. Samuel thought of late nights when the house was too quiet, of Lily asking why Mom didn't come back, of his own silence, because he had no answer. "Tried to," he muttered. Evelyn studied him like she might study a contract, looking for the hidden clause. "And did it work?" He glanced back at her eyes, steady. "I'm still here, aren't I?" Something shifted in her then. Not a smile, not exactly, but a loosening, as though the mask she'd worn since the day she shut this floor had cracked just enough to breathe through. Suddenly a noise echoed from the stairwell. Samuel froze. Evelyn stiffened. It wasn't the hum of building staff. It was heavier, deliberate. Samuel set his tools down and moved toward the sound. "Stay here." The stairwell door creaked. A man stepped through, broad-shouldered coat collar, raised high eyes sharp beneath the brim of a cap. Samuel recognized him instantly, the same figure he'd seen watching from the street yesterday. "What do you want?" Samuel demanded. The man's gaze flicked to Evelyn, then back to Samuel. His voice was cool, practiced. "Miss Hartley, you've been warned not to stir ghosts best left buried." Evelyn's breath caught, but she steadied herself. "Who sent you?" The man didn't answer. He stepped closer. Samuel moved between them, his frame blocking the path. His instincts screamed this wasn't just some stalker or stray journalist. There was purpose in the way the man carried himself, trained precision in every step. "Back up," Samuel said, voice low, solid. The intruder tilted his head, studying Samuel as if reassessing him. "You're just a janitor." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Try me." For a beat, tension stretched taut in the dusty air. Then the man smirked faintly, as if filing away a note. He turned, slipped back through the stairwell, and the door shut behind him with a hollow clang. Evelyn exhaled, shoulders slumping. What was that? Samuel stared at the door, every muscle still taut. "A warning," he said flatly. "But not for you alone." Her eyes searched his. Then for who he bent to gather his tools, but his voice carried enough weight to leave no doubt. For anyone who doesn't want this floor opened. For the first time since her brother's death, Evelyn Hartley realized this wasn't just about grief or healing. Something larger had been buried with the concrete, and Samuel Cross Janitor and single father had just stepped into the middle of it. The stairwell door's echo lingered long after the intruder vanished, reverberating through the empty floor like a threat stitched into steel. Evelyn's breathing was shallow, her hand gripping the back of a chair to steady herself. Samuel stood rigid, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the place where the stranger had disappeared. "You think he'll be back?" she asked quietly. Samuel didn't answer right away. He'd seen that kind of presence before, calm, confident, the kind of man who didn't bluff because he didn't need to. "Yeah," he said finally. "And next time he won't just be walking through." Evelyn closed her eyes for a second, pulling herself together. When she opened them, the steel returned, though her hands still trembled. "We can't stop. Not now." Samuel turned to her, incredulous. "You just had someone walk in here and threaten you. That's not normal office politics. I've lived in boardrooms long enough to know when someone's pulling strings," she said. "This," she gestured toward the stairwell, toward the unfinished walls, "isn't about ghosts anymore. It's about control. Someone doesn't want this floor open, and that means we need to find out why." Samuel crossed his arms, studying her. "And you're still willing to risk it?" Her gaze hardened, and in that moment he saw the CEO. The world recognized the woman who stared down investors who made Fortune 500 companies sweat across mahogany tables. "I'm not letting someone else dictate what parts of this building I get to breathe in. Not again." He almost smiled despite himself. "Guess we're opening a can of worms. Then let's be ready for the bite," she shot back. They spent the next hour combing through the floor. Samuel pried open utility closets, testing wires and pipes, while Evelyn sifted through old construction binders left behind in a forgotten office. Dust filled the air, catching in the dim light like fragments of time refusing to settle. At one point, Samuel found a stack of abandoned crates tucked behind a partition wall. He dragged one into the open and forced the lid off. Inside were reams of stamped documents, permits, inspection records, half-completed signatures. Evelyn flipped through them, her eyes narrowing. "These inspections were falsified," she murmured, "every one of them signed off by someone who hadn't set foot on the site. They pushed it through so fast no one asked questions." "Why rush it?" Samuel asked, leaning over her shoulder. Evelyn pulled out a single file thinner than the rest. A contract. Her family's company had been in negotiations with an outside firm during that time, one tied to infrastructure projects overseas. "Because delays would have cost millions," she whispered. "They needed it finished, even if it meant cutting corners." "My brother—" He caught it. He raised the red flag. "And then the accident," Samuel said grimly. She nodded, her lips pressed tight. "They buried it under grief and policy. They buried him with it." The silence that followed was thick. Samuel felt anger stir in his chest. Not the quick, blinding kind, but the kind that settled deep, fueling resolve. He had seen greed before, had seen how money made people blind to who got crushed in its path. Evelyn closed the file and met his eyes. Whoever that man was, he's protecting someone who doesn't want this uncovered, which means we're not just fighting memory, we're fighting people alive and powerful. Samuel set his jaw. "Then we don't let them win." Before she could respond, a faint noise pricked his ear. The stairwell again, but softer this time. He motioned for her to stay quiet. They pressed against the wall, listening. Footsteps, 2 sets now, maybe 3 descended, then faded away. Whoever had come wasn't entering the floor. Not yet. "They're watching," Samuel muttered. Evelyn's hand brushed her temple, stress flashing across her features. "What do we do?" He looked at her squarely. "We prepare. I'll make sure this floor is safe. Wiring locks the works. You dig through every file you can find. We'll figure out who benefits from keeping this shut down." Her nod was firm, though her eyes betrayed the weight pressing on her. "And if they come back, then they'll find I don't scare easy," Samuel said, voice like gravel. The tension softened just enough for Evelyn to almost smile. Almost. She gathered the documents into her bag, snapping it shut like sealing a vow. When they finally left the floor, Samuel carried his toolbox, but felt something heavier in his grip responsibility. Not just to Evelyn, but to the truth pulsing through those walls. In the lobby, Lily was waiting for him. She ran up with her backpack bouncing her braid, half unraveled from school. "Dad," she beamed, hugging his waist. Then her smile faltered when she spotted Evelyn emerging behind him. "Hi," Evelyn said gently, crouching down to Lily's level. "You must be Lily." Lily clutched Samuel's sleeve, cautious. "Who are you?" Evelyn hesitated, then answered simply, "A friend of your dad's." Samuel watched the two of them. His daughter's guarded eyes, Evelyn's attempt at warmth. The worlds colliding here felt impossible, yet somehow necessary. "We've got work to do," he told Lily, softly ruffling her hair. "But you'll be safe, I promise." She studied his face with the serious wisdom of a child who had already learned too much. "I trust you," she whispered. Those 3 words sank deeper than any threat the stranger had left behind. Because if he failed here, it wasn't just Evelyn's past at stake. It was Lily's future. And Samuel Cross wasn't about to let either one be stolen. That night the city glowed under scattered rain, the streets streaked with reflections of red and gold from neon signs. Samuel stood at his kitchen sink, sleeves rolled back, scrubbing the last of the dinner dishes. Lily had fallen asleep curled on the couch, with a book still open across her chest. He paused, watching her small chest rise and fall, her innocence shielded, at least for now, from the storm he could feel gathering. His phone buzzed against the counter. Unknown number. He wiped his hands and picked up. "You should stay out of this, Mr. Cross." A voice drawled, steady as stone. Samuel's spine stiffened. "Who is this?" A low chuckle. "You don't need to know me. Just know that what you're poking at has already buried better men. You've got a daughter, don't you?" Might be wise to remember that before playing hero. The line went dead. Samuel's grip tightened on the phone, his knuckles white. For a long moment he stood in silence, his reflection wavering in the dark kitchen window. He had seen threats before during his years in the army, enemy voices promising destruction. But hearing it here tied to Lily cut deeper than any battlefield warning ever had. He checked the locks twice before lifting Lily gently into his arms and carrying her to bed. She stirred, whispering in her sleep. "Don't go, Daddy." "I'm right here," he murmured, brushing hair from her face. But inside he knew he couldn't stay still forever. The storm would find its way to their door unless he moved first. Across the city, Evelyn sat alone in her penthouse study. Papers were scattered across the mahogany desk, contracts, and inspection reports lit by the lamp's pale circle. A glass of untouched wine sat nearby. Her phone lay silent, but she stared at it anyway, willing it to ring. Finally, she dialed Samuel's number herself. When he answered, his voice was taut. "They called you too?" she asked. He hesitated, then admitted, "Yeah." "And they mentioned Lily." Evelyn closed her eyes, shame and anger twisting together. "This is my fight. You shouldn't be caught in the crossfire. You think they'll stop with you?" Samuel shot back. "Doesn't work like that. If they know my name, then it's already personal." A silence stretched. For the first time in years, Evelyn allowed someone else's resolve to steady her. "Then we need allies," she said softly. "And I think I know where to start." The following morning, Evelyn led Samuel into a private archive in the tower's lower levels. Rows of steel cabinets lined the walls, holding decades of corporate history. The air smelled of paper and dust. "This is where the old board records are stored," she explained. "My brother used to say if you want to know who pulled the strings, you look at the minutes they tried to hide." Together they combed through folders until Samuel pulled one stamped with a red marker. "Confidential. Do not circulate." Inside were memos outlining expedited permits signed off by a shadow committee. And buried near the back was a name Evelyn hadn't expected: Martin Keene, her father's longtime friend and current board advisor. Her face paled. "He was supposed to protect us." Samuel read over her shoulder, lips tightening. "Looks like he protected the money instead." Before Evelyn could respond, the sound of metal scraping echoed through the stairwell. Samuel's instincts flared. He motioned her behind a cabinet just as 2 men entered, dressed in maintenance uniforms that didn't belong to anyone he knew. Their flashlights swept the rows, their movements too sharp, too coordinated to be genuine workers. Samuel whispered, "Stay low." As the men drew closer, he scanned the room. No weapon, just his toolbox. He grabbed a wrench, its weight familiar in his hand. The taller intruder paused by the cabinets, muttering, "Board wants this cleared out tonight. No loose ends." Evelyn's eyes widened, horror flashing across her face. They weren't here to steal files, they were here to destroy them. Samuel stepped out from behind the cabinet, voice carrying like steel. "Don't think you're supposed to be down here." The men froze, then turned slowly. One smirked. "And you're just a janitor. Move along." Samuel's grip tightened on the wrench. "Not tonight." The intruders exchanged a glance before lunging. The fight was quick, brutal metal clashing against bone fists, striking in the dim light. Samuel absorbed a blow to the ribs but swung back hard, sending one man crashing into a cabinet. Evelyn ducked low, clutching the file against her chest as though it were life itself. Finally, both men staggered toward the door, retreating with curses and threats thrown over their shoulders. Samuel stood panting, the wrench still in hand, sweat stinging his eyes. "You okay?" he asked Evelyn, his voice hoarse. She nodded, though her hands trembled. They would have burned it all. He reached out, steadying her wrist the same way he had in the elevator. "Not while I'm here." In that moment, under the flickering light of the archive, something unspoken bridged the distance between them. Fear, yes, but also trust. Neither of them said it aloud, but both knew this was no longer about survival. This was war. Stormlight pooled over the city, like pewter poured and left to cool. Hartley Tower wore its morning armor, polished marble-clipped footsteps, the low electric purr of 100 decisions, while somewhere above the lobby, an old floor waited to be seen. Samuel was halfway down the service corridor when the sound found him. Not the usual cough and hum of the elevator machinery, something thinner, higher. A frightened note threaded through steel. He stopped, turned his head, listened the way a man learns to listen once he's carried a child through a fever night. There it was again. A small cry swallowed fast, as if someone had told it not to be a problem. He was already moving toolbox, banging his thigh. The stairwell coughed up a draft of cool air that smelled like old dust and hot wires. He shouldered the door to floor 17 so hard it rattled in the frame, then stilled and let the building speak. The faint emergency light over the elevator painted the lobby in a diluted green. From the seam where the doors nearly met, the sound lifted again, closer now, urgent and trying not to be. "Someone's in the car," he said to nobody, to the machine, to the floor. He hit his radio. "Opposites cross on 17. I'm hearing a distress sound in the shaft. Shut down dispatch to all cars. Lock out power to car 2 now. Repeat tag it and lock it." Static, then a voice. Baines from operations, breathless and already annoyed. "Cross, stay clear. Fire's on the way." "Lock it out," Samuel said, not yelling and somehow louder for it. "Do it now." A beat. Then the grudging thunk of relays dropping elsewhere in the building. The light over the car flickered and went steady. "Who's there?" Samuel asked, bending to the seam, letting his breath warm the cold metal. "You tell me your name. I'll bring you home." There was a shiver of sound, then a whisper right against the door. "Leo." "Hey, Leo," Samuel said gently. "I'm Samuel. I fix scared machines and the people they trap," Samuel finished softly, pressing his ear to the seam of the door. The voice inside was trembling, fragile as paper in the wind. "Are you stuck with someone, Leo?" A pause, then the faintest reply muffled by steel. My mom." Samuel's stomach tightened. He tapped the door with his knuckles, gentle, a steady beat, like a promise. "Good. She's not alone. Neither of you are." From inside came another sound, a woman's voice, low, commanding, but cracking at the edges. "Who's out there?" Samuel leaned in. "Name's Samuel Cross. Maintenance. I've got the car powered down. You're not moving anywhere. Just breathe for me." There was silence, then a sharp exhale. "Do you have a daughter?" she asked suddenly. Samuel blinked. "Yeah. Lily." Her voice softened, raw. "Then you know why I can't let my boys see me panic." He understood too well. His chest ached at the memory of nights he'd steadied Lily's hand in the dark, whispering that monsters couldn't get past locked doors. He knew that tone in the woman's voice, the fight to be strong, when everything wanted to split apart. All right, he said firmly, sliding his toolbox open. The smell of oiled steel rose up sharp and grounding. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to pry these doors just enough to get you air and eyes, then we figure our next step. Behind him, boots pounded the stairwell. Firefighters in gear burst through axes at the ready. Their captain barked, "We'll take it from here." But Samuel shook his head. Cars between floors, heavy tension on the cable. You cut wrong, you drop them both. Let me get the latch. Then you can rig a lift. The captain scowled, but Evelyn's voice cut through the metal, brittle yet unyielding. Let him try, please. Samuel wedged his bar into the seam. Muscles burned as he levered steel, groaning in protest. Sweat rolled down his temple, dripping onto the cool floor. Finally, with a shriek, the doors parted just enough for a rush of stale air to escape. Through the gap, wide, frightened eyes blinked at him. A boy, no older than 8, clutching the hand of a woman in a tailored suit now damp with fear and heat. Strands of dark hair clung to her face. Even in the flickering light, Samuel recognized her Evelyn Hartley, CEO of the tower itself. Their gazes locked hers sharp with recognition and pride his steady with grit. For a moment, the titles didn't matter. It was just a man holding a door open and a woman clinging to her son. You're safe, Samuel said, voice rough with effort. And I'm not letting go. The boy pressed closer to his mother. Evelyn whispered back through the narrow gap. We believe you. The firefighters rigged their lines, working fast. But Samuel didn't move his hands, wedged tight on the iron-bearing weight no one else could see. His body was trembling, but his eyes never left Evelyn's. The tower creaked, groaned, as if deciding whether to betray them. Samuel gritted his teeth. Not today, he muttered more to himself than anyone else. And somehow in that dim shaft light, with strangers' lives hanging on his grip, he realized he wasn't just holding a door. He was holding the line against failure, against fear, against a world that had already tried to take too much from him. The shaft echoed with every scrape of metal, every strained groan of the cables above. Sweat blurred Samuel's vision, but he blinked it clear, refusing to release his grip on the steel. His muscles screamed, forearms trembling like coiled wire, yet his voice stayed calm, steady for the boy inside who was watching him like a lifeline. Almost there, he said, forcing air through clenched teeth. Leo, I need you to look at me, not the dark. You see me. Through the gap, 2 wide eyes locked on him. Yeah, Leo whispered. That's it, Samuel urged. Keep your eyes on me. We're walking out of this together. Behind him, the firefighters moved with precision, anchoring ropes to the wall, threading pulleys preparing to draw mother and son out. The captain crouched low, nodding at Samuel. Another 30 seconds. Just hold it. 30 seconds felt like 30 years. Inside the car, Evelyn gripped her son's shoulders, her composure cracking. She had weathered hostile takeovers, lawsuits, betrayals, but nothing rattled her like the sight of steel trembling against Samuel's arms, his whole frame taut with effort just to keep them alive. Why are you doing this? She whispered, her voice barely carrying. Samuel's eyes flicked to hers through the narrow opening. He could barely breathe, but the answer came simple and unshaken. Because someone has to. The ropes creaked as the first harness lowered into the car. The firefighters urged Evelyn to strap Leo in. Her hands shook as she buckled the clips, every click echoing like thunder. Mom, Leo whimpered, don't let go. I'm right here, she promised, kissing his hair. Her own tears threatened, but she swallowed them down, steadying her hands against his cheeks. Be brave for me. The harness lifted the boy's small form, rising slowly toward the gap. Samuel widened the doors by another inch, veins standing out like cords on his neck. The steel shrieked in protest, but he roared back, pouring everything into one last pull. Leo squeezed through the hands, reaching for Samuel's shoulder as the firefighter grabbed him from behind. The boy tumbled into safety, clutching Samuel's arm like he'd known him forever. Got you, buddy? Samuel said, his voice breaking as he eased the boy away toward the waiting arms of the crew. Now, Evelyn. The harness swung down again, and for a second she hesitated. Her eyes locked on Samuel's, this janitor, who had turned into a soldier without warning his body, the only wall between her and collapse. You can't hold it forever, she whispered. Not forever, he said, teeth bared, sweat dripping from his jaw. Just long enough. She nodded, swallowed the last of her fear, and let the harness take her. The firefighters pulled the rope, screeched, and Samuel forced the doors open wider still. Her fingers brushed his for a fleeting heartbeat as she passed through the touch electric charged with gratitude and something else neither of them dared to name. Then she was out. Safe. The firefighters rushed her and Leo down the stairwell, voices buzzing in Samuel's ringing ears. Only then did he release the steel. The doors slammed shut with a thunderous clang that rattled the entire floor. He collapsed to his knees, chest-heaving palms bleeding from where the metal had bitten deep. The wrench lay forgotten beside him. For a moment he bowed his head, letting the silence rush in. The captain clapped his shoulder. "Hell of a hold, son. You just kept that whole car from free-falling." Samuel didn't answer. He was already on his feet, already thinking of Lily, already brushing off the blood. But as he walked down the stairwell, he caught one last glimpse of Evelyn cradling her boy. Her eyes found his shimmering in the emergency glow, and she mouthed something no one else saw. "Thank you." It was the first time in years anyone had said it to him like it meant more than words. The stairwell smelled of sweat, steel, and smoke. Samuel's boots echoed against concrete as he descended, his palms still raw, his breath ragged. The night had turned his body into an anvil, every nerve ringing from the blows he'd absorbed. But Evelyn Hartley lingered at the landing, clutching her son against her chest, refusing to move farther until she saw him. The firefighters urged her down, but she shook her head sharply. Her eyes were locked on Samuel as if tethered by something invisible. When he reached her, she stepped forward, trembling but proud, her voice breaking in its quiet force. "You saved him. You saved us." Samuel lowered his gaze, wiping blood on the side of his pants. "You'd have done the same." Her lips parted as if to argue, then she stopped. She studied his face, saw the exhaustion etched into him, the weight of a man who carried his battles silently. It wasn't just strength that had held those doors. It was grief, love, and the refusal to fail again. Leo wriggled in her arms, turning wide eyes up at Samuel. "You didn't let go," the boy whispered. Samuel managed a tired smile. "Not my style." The firefighters pressed them to keep moving, but Evelyn lingered one last heartbeat. She placed her hand over Samuel's firm, warm, shaking slightly. It was more than thanks. It was recognition, a vow unspoken. By the time they reached daylight, cameras were flashing, reporters shouting the chaos of a city hungry for spectacle. But Evelyn ignored it all. She shielded Leo with one arm, and with the other she motioned Samuel forward into the light with them. For the first time, the janitor and the CEO walked out side by side, not as opposites, but as survivors bound by something deeper than status. And though Samuel slipped into the crowd soon after retreating from the glare, Evelyn's eyes followed him. In that moment, she knew the man who had risked everything for strangers was no stranger at all. He was the one person she could never forget. Word count 1, 225. Your thoughts will help us create meaningful stories. And if you want to hear more powerful healing stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the bell icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And most importantly, share this video with people who need a little hope today. Thank you so much for your time. We hear you, we listen to you, and we are honored to tell these stories for you.